chair, so we may have interacted a little bit, so it's nice to see you. I'm just going to do a quick introduction. I have Amy Andrews and Jessica McMakin. They're both adult educators for Literacy West, and today they are going to talk about how to effectively co-teach in adult education. So I'm just going to hand it over to you, ladies.
Good morning. I'm just waiting for 1 second. I know Jess is, I think, pulling up the PowerPoint thing
I'm
for.
going to be sharing our screen. And here we are.
All right. So I'm going to move this over a minute. So as Sarah said, we are going to be talking about co-teaching today. So we titled our little thing, Stop, Collaborate, and Listen. So we're going to first start with our agenda. So I'm going to have Jess read over that for everybody, and then we'll get started.
There we go. Okay. Hi, everybody. Today's agenda is going to involve, first, we're going to introduce ourselves. We're going to talk about who we are and what we do. We're going to talk about what is co-teaching. We're going to do a little game with you about the myths and truths about like what you know about co-teaching already. We're going to take you through the various models of co-teaching and some do's and don'ts. And then we anticipated a lot of people will say, well, I don't have a co-teacher. So how does this apply to me? So we're going to talk about sharing and collaborating with colleagues and just making the most of that planning work for you. Right? So without further ado, let's introduce ourselves.
All right.
And I think we have a few people in the waiting room as well.
Jess, I'm going to have you kind of go through, like if you can hit to advance, because I can't get that like yesterday when we practiced.
Sure, no problem.
Perfect. Okay.
And I'll get you there.
Thanks.
There we go.
Hey. So first of all, you were probably wondering who we are. So my name is Amy. As Sarah had mentioned, I have been with Literacy West for going on 8 years now, but I've been in adult ed for probably like 11 years. And before that, I taught in elementary school. So throughout those years, I have had co-teachers on and off. In elementary school, it was a lot different than it is in adult ed, and we'll get into some of the reasons why in a little bit. So I'm going to turn it over to my partner in crime to explain herself.
My name is Jess McMakin. I've been with CORE for almost 5 years now, but I've been working in adult ed probably about 15 years. I've never had a formal co-teaching relationship. I've worked as an aide in a classroom. I've had aides, but as far as having a full and equal partner, it's only been in this sort of setting, a little bit different than some of you may have had experience with. And Amy and I have now worked together for almost 5 years. When I first started at CORE, Amy kind of brought me on and showed me the ropes, and we've taught together, and we've worked as colleagues, and we've also now done a few presentations together. So we kind of have had a chance to see how this goes and how we can work best together. When it comes, oh my goodness. I'm sorry. We'll get you there. Sorry, everybody. All right. When it comes to co-teaching, you're always going to be dealing with people with different styles, different teaching styles than your own. My style is that I love whole group instruction. I'm very loosey-goosey. I just kind of let it all hang out, especially with adult ed. So things can get kind of messy at times. And I love it when my students can learn from each other as well as just from me. So I love it when we're doing station teaching. And I also, in terms of co-teaching, I love team teaching. And also the one teach, one assist. Those are my favorite approaches. Amy, on the other hand,
So my style's a little different kind of than Jess. I do like to get my students up and moving. So a lot of times I like to do like scavenger hunts where they're going from place to place answering questions. And the more they can talk to each other and talk each other through the questions, I love it because I feel they learn more because they're explaining it and absorbing it. Um, as for my preferred co-teaching approaches, station teaching, which is kind of like what I just described, team teaching and alternative teaching, and we will get into those momentarily.
hey, I am just really struggling with my little controls over here.
I'd help you if I could.
I know. Hmm.
Do you have to use a mouse? Maybe using the arrows on the keyboard might help.
Oh, I have tried using the arrows. They're not cooperating, but I think we're good.
Okay. So you may be
Thank you.
asking, what do we mean when we talk about co-teaching? So there's many things. One of the things we found was this perfect quote that talks about co-teaching. And the quote said, co-teaching is the modality for bringing together people from different disciplines to share knowledge and talents to facilitate learning. So I like this quote because it does bring out everything. No matter who you're paired with, if you get to pick who you get to work with, which is not usually the case, but everybody's going to be different. So everybody comes with different disciplines, different knowledge that they have, and everybody has different talents. So putting them together works great for you sometimes, but also the students.
Probably what most of us are comfortable with is the traditional model that we use for co-teaching in K through 12. And usually that's a partnership between co-teacher pairs. So just two teachers working together. Almost always one is a general education teacher. And in like the elementary school, that could be, a grade level teacher, or in the upper levels, it could be a subject material teacher. And then usually the other teacher is a special education teacher, some sort of specialist, whether it be ESL or special education, literacy. You're usually going to have that person specializing. Um, in any situation, whenever you have co-teaching happening, it's going to require time and effort from both teachers. You are really required to communicate effectively and almost constantly, and it really helps to have a level of trust in your partner or in your co-teacher. And we have here a classic pair of our favorite co-teachers from our childhood.
Sure is.
Okay.
All right. So as we mentioned earlier, we are going to play a game. We thought this would be kind of fun just to see what everybody's thoughts are. So we're going to play co-teaching myths and truths. So we're going to, how it's going to work is we're going to read a thought on co-teaching, and we want to hear from you if you guys think it's a truth or if you think it's a myth. So true or false, basically. And feel free to shout out what you're thinking and not just put it in the chat, because it'll be easier probably for us to see it, because I'm not getting all the chat things, I don't think either. So we're going to start off with our first thought here. There are two ways to co-teach. one teach, one assist, and station teaching. Do you think that's true, or do you think it's false? Oh, I did see in the chat, somebody has false, another false. So another false. All right, so it seems to be a consensus, Jess. That's to be false.
Y'all are right. There are actually 6 different models to choose from, and we will be taking you through those in a little bit. So good on you if you were paying attention at the beginning or you just happen to have some experience with this. Next one. So answer true or false. Co-teaching is always one content teacher and one special education teacher pushing in. What do you think? And you can put your answers in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and speak if you like. Everybody wants to chat.
I did hear that they were having sound issues, so that could be why. So
Okay.
I'm seeing lots of falses for this one.
Okay.
So surprisingly, this is true. Oh, somebody did just post true. Good job, Paula. So it is true, but it is not the only way it can work.
And I did confound it when I said always ahead of time. Y'all are good test takers. You know that, the always and never are hardly ever right.
All right. So our next thought is only a specialist needs to know the specifics of students' IEPs, challenges, and disabilities. So what do you think? Do you think true or false? Seeing a lot of falses again.
Oh yeah. So many falses. They're just pouring in.
They are.
Um,
They're
and
very smart people.
they are. We're working with teachers here. So we've got, yes, all of you are correct. The more each teacher familiarizes themselves with the student, the better. And you probably know this from years in adult education, of course. All right, what about this one? The teacher who normally works with the students should do the bulk of the planning.
So what are we thinking? True or false?
Amy, are you able to read the chats real easily?
They're popping up. So I've gotten a couple falses. I think I saw true. And for this one here, the majority rules, it is false. Co-teaching works better when both teachers are able to plan together and not just the person that works with them normally.
Agreed. Yeah.
So our next thought is the teacher who is most familiar with the subject matter should lead the lesson. What are you thinking?
What are they saying?
Getting a couple trues.
Okay.
Yep, it seems to be consensus. Somebody did put a true with a question mark, so they weren't really.
They're thinking on it.
Yeah, they're thinking about it.
And we put sometimes. While this may be more comfortable, most of us are much more comfortable in our comfort zone where we're like, I know this subject material. Between the two of us, Amy's the math teacher, and most of the time I'm very content to let her take the lead on this. However, sometimes there are other ways to structure your teaching that may benefit the students. Occasionally, the teacher who might feel that they have a weak spot may be able to spot some situations where the students might struggle. And then when we take you through the models of co-teaching, you might find out that both teachers are leading the lesson, or they both have a very important role to go with. So again, it's a sometimes. What do you think about Now this is turning the lens towards the students. Both students with special needs and those without special needs can benefit from co-teaching. What are people's thoughts?
I'm getting trues from almost, I think from everybody I've seen trues for that one.
I feel like we made this too easy.
I think so. And all these trues are correct because most students do benefit from smaller groups and more focused, individualized instruction, whether they have special needs or not. Everybody
Oh.
benefits.
Although this can be a complaint in traditional classrooms, the idea of like, oh, we're dumbing it down for the mainstream students, and it's just not true.
All right, so our next thought was when I co-teach, I am ultimately more responsible for what my students learn. So what are your thoughts about that? I don't know, they must like, oh, I got one. Okay, I'm getting some falses now. I was like, I think they left. All right, lots of falses on this one.
All right. Yep. The general consensus with co-teaching is that when we co-teach, we share the students. So they're not yours, they're not mine, they are ours. So we are both responsible for what our students are learning. And here's the final one. This is as much your attitude as anything, but what's your opinion? Co-teaching is impossible in adult ed.
Oh, lots of falses.
Lots of falses.
Lots of falses. They were really quick on that one.
Oh, that's great. We have a bunch of optimists in the group.
And you are correct. While it can be difficult, there are many ways we can adapt these concepts to adult ed. And we are going to start talking about some of those different models now.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about the 6 models of co-teaching. One that you may be familiar with. This kind of harkens back to my student teaching days. It kind of gives me the willies when I think about it. It's called one teach, one observe. This is when one teacher obviously is leading the lesson, while the other is observing and gathering data to be reviewed later. Like I said, when I was doing my student teaching, they were gathering data on me. But in the real world, it can be used to see, what's going on with a particular student or a couple of students when they're learning, and if they're not getting something. You could just say, hey, can you watch me teach this? I don't know what I'm doing, but they're just not getting it. Or you might just say, I want to sit in and observe. I want to see how you do it. One teach, one assist. This is when one teacher takes the lead instructing the class while the other one is circulating the room and providing assistance. This isn't used as frequently in true co-teaching models because it can appear that one teacher is an aide or inferior to the other teacher. So unless you're switching this model pretty frequently, the students may get the idea that one teacher is the boss and the other one is just kind of there. So you don't want to overuse this model. And then this is one of my favorites. There's station teaching. The content is divided into 2 different lessons, and the students are divided into 2 groups. And each teacher teaches one station, and the students are going to rotate through. In order for this to work, both teachers need to be really familiar with the content, because you're not going to be able to rely on the other teacher to give an explanation while you're teaching. I really love stations. I think that the students get a lot out of it. And it's fun. Another advantage is it does get the students up and moving at least part of the way through the class.
So our 4th model is parallel teaching. This is where both teachers teach the same lesson at the same time to equal groups of heterogeneous mix of students. It allows for differentiation, and both teachers must know all of the content. In all the years that I've taught and co-teach or taught with people, I've never done parallel teaching. I know Jess said she knew somebody that talked about that they are familiar with it, but I've never known anybody to do this one. Team teaching. I'm very familiar with team teaching. This is where both teachers take turns teaching the same lesson to the whole class at the same time. It requires the most coordination and planning. And the last model is alternative teaching, where one teacher instructs a large group of students while the other teacher instructs a smaller group more intensively. This can be used to help students catch up after maybe if they were out and absent. It might work for them being in that smaller group to get a little bit more information that they may have missed. So when co-teaching, there are some rules and things that we should do and we shouldn't do. So we compiled a little list of things that we feel that are crucial to co-teaching and some things that we say you don't want to do while co-teaching. So I'm going to read over the do this list. And so one of the things you do want to do when co-teaching is to communicate often, not just for professional reasons, but also for fun. Get to know each other. It's going to make co-teaching a lot easier. Another thing you want to do is refer to the class as ours. Get out of that habit of saying yours, mine. You want to be referring to it as ours, kind of thinking of it like a marriage. There's no more I, you, it's ours. We want to work with all the students regularly. So everybody should get turns with working with everybody and just cohesively. You want to encourage students to use what your partner has taught them. So they may have been taught one way by the other person. And if you know that works for them better, encourage them to use it. Bring up, what did so-and-so tell you yesterday to do? And have it kind of trigger back to them. Another thing is plan together collaboratively. You want to work together. You need to be on the same page when co-teaching.
So just like Amy got to be like the little angel on your shoulder, do this. I get to be the little devil on your shoulder. Don't do this. And some of these may sound obvious, and you're like, why would anybody ever do that? But then you get in a situation and you may find yourself catching yourself and go, oh, I did not consider that that would happen to me. Top tier. Do not argue in front of the students. Just like kids, sometimes they will try to get you into a little bit of a debate with your partner. Don't give in. Equally, you don't want to treat the other teacher as your subordinate or as an aide or someone who doesn't have the same credentials that you do. You always want to make sure that you're treating your partner with respect. As Amy said, you don't want to get in the habit of saying, oh, well, your students or well, my students. Like we talked about before, they're all our students. We're concerned about everybody's success. So if you find that you're getting in the habit of saying, oh, well, my students, maybe you want to switch up how you're co-teaching so that you get in a different flow, different habit of mind. Students are just as bad as kids when it comes to this. Do not let them do the, oh, well, if mom said no, let's just go ask dad, or vice versa. We all know that different people have different weaknesses, and it's very easy to just say, well, what do you think I should do? As Amy said, it's very easy to say, well, what did Amy teach you yesterday? What did Amy say about having or about using this skill or solving this problem? And a lot of times at that point, they're like, oh, well, she said, and I'm like, that's exactly right.
Well, and it's good that they know that you're talking together. So by bringing up something, they're like, oh, they must have spoken. So they don't get into the habit of trying to, if mom says no, go ask.
Oftentimes, if I'm following up on a skill that my co-teacher used yesterday, I'll say, so I know yesterday you worked on this with Amy, Meg, whoever I happen to be working with. And then they kind of know up front, like, oh, everybody's informed, everybody's on the same page. And it does kind of keeps the students' minds at ease as well. It's like, oh, I don't have to explain anything. We're just going to pick up right where we left off. And again, most of the time, teachers are used to having to do all the planning. So it's more likely that both of you will try to do all the prep. But don't allow one person to do the bulk of the prep and then just kind of float in. Again, teachers are probably over planners. You're going to be more likely to redo the planning than to let it fall on your partner. But this is, again, something you got to work out with communication. So, Amy, I feel like we've been talking for a little bit. Should we ask them if they have any questions or things that they'd like to contribute so far?
We sure can.
Guys, again, you're welcome to put any thoughts or ideas in the chat, or you're welcome to just shout them out. Some of you may be trying to eat your lunch and you might have full mouths, which is why you're trying to chat instead of talk. But feel free to speak or put anything in the chat if you want to contribute, or if you just have a question on anything that we've talked about so far.
Oh, somebody
Paula,
raised
what you
their hand.
got?
Yeah.
Feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I have a question. So more about the population that you work with. Are
Okay.
these GED students? Are they ESOL students? Because I heard math. So I was
Yes.
like, great.
So I work with GED students as well as some SL students too. So I do both, and I will let Jess explain what she works with.
My background is in working with ESL students, but over the past 5 years, I've also added in working with ABE students as well. So I've had a little bit of experience with both. Paula, do you mostly work with ESL students or with ABE?
ESOL students. We don't work with, I mean, my department, we don't work with AB or GED students. So that's why I was curious. We do use co-teaching.
Mhm.
Specifically for workforce training programs.
Okay.
So it's yeah, it's interesting.
Okay. Is that like through an IET model?
Yes, so there's always not always. When they co-teach, there's the expert in the room and then the ESOL teacher. So they do have to plan together so they know what's happening in the class. But the leader is always the expert, and the ESOL just helps with the language.
Right, they would be pushing in and giving language support, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct. And it works really well. I mean, the students like that.
I would imagine in that kind of group, you're not getting a whole lot of like, oh, well, if mom says no, go ask dad kind of attitude. Usually when students are in those IET programs, they're like very laser focused about what they want to learn. There's not a whole lot of silly games that students are trying to play with you.
No, but it's interesting because the ESOL instructor then kind of monitors the class, the language that the expert is using, because the expert doesn't have a lot of experience working with the ESOL students. So sometimes the language they speak, it's a problem.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you for your contribution.
Yes, thank you.
Anybody else have a slightly different experience like Paula does, like where you're working with a specific population or the co-teachers, might be experts in one field versus another? Anybody else like to share their experience? Okay. We'll move on a little bit. And, feel free to either chime in or raise your hand or put anything in the chat that you might like.
We're going to be asking him a question in a minute too.
That's true.
You may be thinking to yourself, but I don't have a co-teacher. I know that working in adult ed, it is not always the case that you have a co-teacher or are able to have a co-teacher. So on the bottom of the screen, you're going to notice we have a couple percentages. we did a little research to try and come up with some statistics. So we came up with 3 different ones, and we were wondering if you have any idea what they have to do with co-teaching or the adult education field. So we have the number 56%, 46%, and 23%. So does anybody have any guesses as to what any of those they think have to do with adult education or co-teaching? You can write it in the chat. You can shout out. What are your thoughts?
What might be some barriers to having a co-teacher or co-teaching in adult education?
Funding.
Funding.
Yep.
Always. Money is always an issue.
Any other thoughts?
Quiet group.
It is quiet. They're not even texting in the chat box.
They're
It might
eating.
also be success rates, perhaps, or how other teachers feel about co-teaching.
Okay.
Could have something to do with people's attitudes about co-teaching.
Okay. And somebody wrote in the chat that the environment doesn't allow for a co-teacher.
And I think that kind of nudges us, that and funding kind of nudges us
Correct.
closest to our answers here. So this is kind of, technology, you are my enemy. Okay. So these are some figures that we came up with when we were researching what it's like to work in adult ed, ESL specifically, but adult ed in general. The majority of us, not by much, but the majority of us work part-time. Almost half of adult ed teachers don't receive any paid prep time. So there goes your co-planning time. And 23% of those adult ed teachers don't receive any type of paid professional development. So this wonderful support that you're lending us during your lunchtime, 23% of those people aren't getting paid for that or aren't being compensated for it. When you work part-time, oftentimes you're going from one job to the next. You may only have a half an hour or an hour of planning time at a day, a week. You may not be paid for planning time at all. At that, when you're working with other people who also work part-time, the structure doesn't necessarily allow for like, okay, let's sit down and put our heads together for 2 hours after the students leave today. Amy and I are fairly fortunate in that we do have some times to put our heads together, but even sometimes we're meeting outside of work and we are in a very well supported environment. I know that my previous experience before I came to this job, I was working part-time as an ESL teacher, and I filled the rest of my day by working daycare. So it wasn't like I said, oh, well, let's just co-teach this afternoon. Wasn't an option. So are there any of you who are in a similar boat? Are there any people who do work part-time or don't have a lot of planning time as an adult ed teacher? You could just put like a thumbs up if that's something that applies to you. We don't have to get into the nitty-gritty of it. So oftentimes the structure of adult ed, and also as Paula said, funding. I'm sure all of our programs would, pay us all full time and pay us for all of our prep time and send us to as much professional development as we would like if they could afford it. And a lot of times we just look at our program managers and they're like, I'm sorry, honey, I'm out of money. And that's just kind of the way that it is in terms of money and adult ed versus K-12. So it can be a bit of a struggle. So that's kind of why we said, well, this isn't exactly co-teaching, but what can you do? Because many of us would like to connect with other teachers. One of the sources that I looked at said that teaching can be a very lonely profession. Many of us would really like to connect with our colleagues. So here are some things that we can do. The first step is try to open yourself up to that connection. Many times people say teaching can be a very lonely profession. We come in the morning, we say good morning to our to our colleagues. We say, "Hey, how was your weekend? You know, this is what I did last night," and then we close our doors and we talk to our students, and then we don't see anybody else for the rest of the day. So one step is to consciously step outside of your silo and spend a few minutes. Maybe at first I said spend a few minutes each day, and then I said, no, that's totally unrealistic. Spend a few minutes, maybe each week, just catching up on what other people in your field are doing. I know for a fact that I became interested in mindfulness in the classroom. And I started looking around, and once a week, sometimes once a month, I'll get on Google for a few minutes and I'll say, what are those other teachers doing? Are there podcasts? Are there always already things out there that I could be using? Do I have to do this all by myself? Usually, no. Ask yourself, am I the only one who is teaching slope? Am I the only person who is teaching irregular past tense? Am I the only person who is teaching this vocabulary? Or is there somebody else in my faculty? Is there somebody else in my group who's also doing this? Because sometimes we hit a wall. And, we're just as likely to go on the internet, go on Teachers Pay Teachers, go to other sources before we reach out to our colleagues. And once in a while I'll say, Amy, oh my gosh, I am struggling with this so much. How do you teach this? It's like I've stood on my head, my students still don't know it. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Or like, I've never taught this before. Amy will sometimes come to me and say, hey, I have a class full of low-level ESL students. They just handed me somebody who maxed out a Best Plus. What do I do with them? So we'll sit together and brainstorm. The main lesson to be learned here is when we connect with other teachers, sometimes we put ourselves in that situation where we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We're not constantly out there looking for material. You might say, hey, did you do something with this? And she goes, yeah, I have a thing on that. Let me send that over to you. Which brings us, I think, to our next little tip here.
Yeah, so once you've connected with people, the next step would be to collaborate with them. So one of the things we came up with was to offer to trade materials or expertise with a trusted coworker or colleague. Just like Jess said, I may reach out because like Jess said that she's been doing more ABE the last couple of years and had always done ESL. Mine is reversed. I did more ABE and now I'm doing more ESL. So she's a great person that I collaborate with and will reach out if I need materials or some other idea of what to do with my students. So offer to trade those materials or expertise. How could your students benefit from two great minds instead of one? Again, just as Justin said, I may try teaching my ESL students, I don't even know, like verb conjugation, and they're not understanding. And I might be like, hey, Jess, what have you done in the past? And she'll say, oh, I did this. And I'm like, I never thought of that. So yes, she may not be in the same building with me, but my students can still benefit from two great minds instead of just one. Is there a lesson or presentation that both you and a colleague have interest in exploring? So again, Jess mentioned mindfulness. Last year, we were both interested in mindfulness and we did a presentation on it together. So we connected and collaborated on that. Also offer to share the work in researching or planning on this topic. So when we're presenting or coming up with presentation, we're constantly sharing the work. We don't want one person doing more than the other. So we collaborate together.
And this is also something that can help people who don't have paid prep time. If you're both teaching the same sort of thing and you say, man, this is killing me. You may reach out to a colleague and say, do you want to share the work? Is there a way that we could prep together? You might not have your students in the same classroom, but if you're teaching the same subject material, this may be a way that you can save yourself some time and work.
So also join forces. Most of us have strict schedules that may or may not overlap with others. So that's kind of going off of what Josh just had mentioned. It's easy to kind of work together when they're not even in the same building sometimes too.
Choose a topic that you and this other teacher feel will benefit your audience. So like last year for our presentation, it was self-care. It could just be we also have an IET model. We're doing IELCE sort of stuff. And part of what we do is sort of hotel type certifications. So we have guest room attendant, we have tourism, we have some of these topics that we have to teach across the board. We might not be doing them at the same time, but we know that all of our students are going to be going through it. So I might say, oh, have you taught tourism with your students yet? Here's a really helpful resource that I found. Or let's plan just that one lesson together.
Which leads into making a plan to co-teach just that lesson, unit, or block of time. So maybe we've also done this in the past. I always ran a math Zoom game. So it may have been math review, but also all of our centers would log on, and we have 5 centers throughout the area. So all 5 would log on, and I would basically teach with them, helping as assistant, kind of teaching in their own classrooms, a math lesson. So just building it with that, just a slight block of time you may have, others can find a time to work with you together at that time.
And when Amy got a little bit more experienced at it, she's like, oh, I could reach out to the other teachers and ask them to contribute some problems for the math Zoom. And that way I know I'm serving everybody. And I'm also not having to do all of the planning myself, because it's a lot of work. And then our last tip, and some of you might have a little chuckle at this, but some of you are going to be lucky. The last tip we have is try to get some support from your management if you can, because this may help you open up a block of time either for planning, or they might say, hey, I'm sorry, we don't do paid prep, but they might be able to work it out scheduling wise so that you could share a block of instruction with another teacher. If not all the time, maybe for once, or, maybe once a week. It might be something that you're able to swing. And we know, there are a variety of management styles, and some of you may have managers that you can just walk in their office and say, hey, you know what I need? And they're like, you got it. And there may be other management styles where this is more difficult. So we know that there's a range. So putting it out to you guys again, how have you done any of these 3 things in the past? How do you connect with your colleagues? Have you ever planned lessons together with another teacher? What are your experiences with co-teaching? Do you ever share instruction? And if so, what does that look like for you? Again, you're welcome to put it in the chat, or if you finished eating your lunch and you want to speak, go for that.
I have a question. Sorry. So actually I have 2 questions. The first one is, have you tried, I know you said that you do co-teaching, right? Have you ever tried the other methods like parallel teaching or pushing?
So I myself have never tried. parallel teaching. And I was talking about that with the woman that I most work with most frequently yesterday. And I said, what is this model? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. Like, why would you do it? And she said she ended up using it. Now, she was in a K-12 building when she used it. But she said the regular classroom that she was pushing into was very chaotic. They had problems with violence, they had problems with fights, things were very disorganized. And she found that the kids who also had ESL challenges at that point were not picking up on anything. They just weren't able to hone in on what the teacher was saying. So one of the models that her supervisor suggested, she said, have you tried parallel teaching? It's a model. And she said, as long as you're teaching what those kids need to learn and what they would be learning in the larger classroom, you can pull them out. And she said, excellent idea. So it was something that they did just to give those give those give those kids a better chance at focusing in a less chaotic environment. But let me see, what have I tried?
I know, like, I've done alternative teaching even in like my classroom now. I have a co-teacher at times too, so it's easy to, if a person has been out and hasn't been in class, that we can kind of break up the students that way and say, okay, well, I'll pull these few that haven't been here the last few days and work with them on this and catch them up while the other person works and continues on with the lesson. So I've done it that way.
How do you deal when one teacher is really popular against the other one who, because you bring your personality to the classroom, how do you deal with when the students might like one teaching style much better than the other? How do you work with that?
So, with that, I think in students, I don't know if I've necessarily had that like as a issue, but a lot of times students, I do know like a lot of the people that I've worked with are so completely different than me. And some students, if they're not getting it from me, I'm like, hey, why don't you go see so and so, because they have a different take on how they teach it and it might help you better. So it's nice when we're able to do that because we both know that everybody has a different strength than what the other has. So it works that way. And I think it's even better for the students because they're able to see it two different ways and work with what works for them best.
I know for me, it's very difficult for sometimes it's difficult to hear when a student's like, well, Amy taught it to me the other day and I understood what she said, and now you're just confusing me. And sometimes they're not all that delicate with how they respond to you. They're not so worried about your feelings. And, sometimes it is hard to hear because basically it comes across as Amy is a better teacher than you and you stink. And so sometimes I just kind of have to swallow my pride and just say, "Oh, okay, so show me what Amy taught you." Now, if Amy's there, that's great. I can be like, excellent. Let's see if Amy has a minute and she can show it to you again. Sometimes she's not there. We had a situation where they would have Amy Mondays and Fridays. They'd have me Tuesday through Thursday. Amy was nowhere to be found. And I had this frustrated student standing in front of me going, that's not how she taught me. I said, okay. And sometimes at that point, I'll say, show me what she showed you. And sometimes they can recall it. And sometimes they're like, I don't know, it was just different. Oftentimes at that point, I'll just say, I understand that you're really frustrated. I'm gonna circle back. I'm gonna check with Amy. I'll talk with her at the end of today and I'll see what I can learn. Or, if we haven't had a chance to touch base before. Ideally, of course, we would have talked about this before. Not how it happens sometimes in real world. Sometimes they'll say, I'll run it by her. I'll ask her what she showed you, and then I'll come back again and see if I can show it to you in that way that was making sense to you. But it involves a lot of trust. I'm just like, okay, she's better at this than I am.
And I will say you can't take to heart too when they like say, well, so-and-so taught me to, because I know personally I learn different ways as well as everybody learns some differently. So if they come out and say it, they don't necessarily mean you stink as a teacher. They're just saying, I learned it better from this person. They showed it to me the way that I could understand it. So I can't take to heart the way that they come out and like, I didn't get that. I learned it from this person. Okay, that's great. So like what Jess was saying too, like, okay, show me, how did they show you? Because that might help me help you in the future as well if that person's not around.
And occasionally it'll jog their memory. They'll say, oh yeah, now I remember what she showed me.
Right.
I noticed that some people have put in the chat that they'll plan for I'm looking for it. They might co-plan the entire curriculum so that everybody's on board. Everybody knows like what's going to be taught that whole semester or what's going to be taught that cycle. So everybody's familiar with the scope and sequence. That seems very valuable because then you'd be able to refer back and say, hey, remember when we planned that we were going to do this? I've gotten to that point and I might not I might not be having success with it, or maybe somebody's having better success. I noticed that we're getting towards the end of our time. So I'm just going to try and get us through the end of the presentation. Let's see.
So we're going to look at some steps to take as you collaborate or co-teach. So just some things to kind of help you out a little bit. So developing co-teaching relationships takes time and effort of both teachers, not just one. The most important factors associated with successful co-teaching relationships was common planning time and having a positive working relationship. So out of those, we talked about, we wanted to like kind of hone in on planning it out. So we mentioned choosing the topic and the model of co-teaching you want to use. Decide who's going to fill which role and how to refer to one another. And then study that material to be presented and troubleshoot your plans. So you want to make sure you have it all planned out. You know what you're doing, just like we did, and then the computer wants to act up today.
Absolutely.
We had it all planned out. But then you got to have troubleshooting plans. Also be positive. Inform the students what you will be doing and why you're doing it this way. Have your partners back. Know your content and anticipate those pitfalls. And then afterwards, regroup and give each other productive feedback. What worked? What didn't work? What could we change for next time? Because every time it could get better.
And you can always phrase your responses as like, I noticed, or this is how I felt. And that usually invites the other person to honestly reply as well.
Right. I thought this worked really well. What did you think? Yep.
And if you do get a chance to plan together, or, as you're going forward, working with your coworkers, here are just some tips that Amy and I have found that work really well for us. We do try to play to our strengths. We talk to each other about what we do well, how we like to run our classroom, because as you said, sometimes you get very different styles of teaching. Amy and I are great friends. We don't teach the same way at all. So we do have to communicate sometimes. And this may inform what type of co-teaching model you want. Do you always want to be passing the baton back and forth, or does that not really work for you? Would you rather do it stations? Would you rather do parallel teaching? So depending on your personality and your teaching styles, you might reject certain models and embrace others.
And as well as Jess said there too, the play to your strengths. It is good when you know the person you're working with as well, because they can also tell you something when you're like, I don't know about this. And they're like, but this is a strength of yours. You may not even notice it yourself and they can notice it. So one of the other things we came up with is to be open to suggestions. Your partner may have a different approach or style of instruction than you're used to, just like we mentioned, but you want to try and be flexible. Knowing that and getting out of your comfort zone can be a good thing. It doesn't necessarily mean something bad. And in fact, you might even learn you like trying something different. The last one is to keep calm and plan on. Co-teaching should be an opportunity to relax and share the load, and not just a stressful command performance that you're on your own and doing it because the other person is like, "Ooh, I'm taking the day off." So you want to make sure you're working together.
Thank you, Amy.
Sure.
I'm taking the rest of the day off.
Sure.
So we have just a couple last minutes. This is our last discussion slide. As a closing thought, do any of you have any suggestions for maybe experiences that you've had in the past that you're like, you know, the best tip that I have for somebody who's going to co-teach would be this. Give us, while we're talking, could you offer us some free advice? Or advice for your other coworkers? If you think of something that you're not able to share today, you can always email us, or how are they going to get in touch with us?
Oh, somebody did post in the chat, try different approaches and see what works. I love that idea.
Yeah. Because
Yep.
you're not always going to nail it on the first try.
Correct.
And we'll send out a follow-up email with your contact if you want to share that, and any materials you want to share, and a link to the video, the recording for today. So
Oh,
that's
perfect.
what-
And
Yeah, thank you so much.
I do have the like PowerPoint or whatever slideshow too. So
Yeah, anybody who wants a copy can certainly have a copy of this presentation. So,
and somebody did post 2 different approaches work with different co-teachers, and that is correct as well.
yeah. My co-teacher that I work with on a regular basis said to me yesterday, she's like, hopefully your co-teacher won't take the approach of, this is my classroom, you go sit in the corner. Which I think, you know, is a negative experience that some people have had. So yeah, I think we've come a long way from that. And I think that we are more likely to be more egalitarian in adult ed. But yeah, we certainly do know that different approaches can work with other people. We want to thank everyone so much for taking out your lunchtime and spending it with us. We appreciate your participation. And if you need any resources, these will be included with the document as well. These are some of the things that we used for our research. Nell posted on the chat. There's an evaluation for the session today. I'm sure that she would appreciate it if you could complete that.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and both of you, Amy and Jess, for being willing to take your lunchtime and more time than that to present for us today. So we really, really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody who joined us today. And we look forward to seeing you maybe at the conference, and if not, certainly at our next Lunch and Learn. So take care, everybody.
Thank
Awesome.
you all.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.